Hello and welcome to the VDL-V Create Round 1 Playoff Highlight video. This is going to be a little bit different than our previous highlights. This is going to be a little bit more in depth. In addition, if you want to watch any of the matches in full, there's all the video links are in the description below. Let's get straight into the first match. The first match is against the Pogging Porygons and the Old English Ice Cubes. Let's get into the match. So here's the teams. The team in the front is the Pogging Porygons, and the team on the left is the Old English Ice Cubes. We're going to be following the team of the Pogging Porygons, and let's get into the match. So we see that the Ice Cubes lead Tapu Koko and Lucario, and the Porygons leaves Grass Silvally and Blastoise. Blastoise goes for a fake out into the protect of the Tapu Koko, and Silvally gets a Sword Stance off, which is very powerful, getting its doubling its attack. And Lucario is able to get an electric boosted terrain pulse and does a little bit under 50% of the Blastoise. We see that the Blastoise gets switched out into the Dragalge, and the Brave Bird from the Tapu Koko goes into the Silvally, just barely surviving. And the Silvally at +2 is able to just barely miss out on the KO on Lucario. However, Lucario is able to finish off the Silvally, going with a pretty reasonable turn. We get to see a couple switch-ins and the positioning, and the Dragalge's Sludge Wave ends up missing everything. And Lucario is able to get a circle throw, throwing out the Bronzong, preventing Trick Room, which is huge. We see some couple switch-ins, and the Blastoise is able to go for a fake out. However, Lucario reveals its inner focus and is able to get an attack off before the Dragalge finishes it off with the Dragon Pulse. From there, we see that we get a couple switches, and there's a very big switch in here in which the Dragalge switches into Bronzong because it takes a double up from the Size Shock and the Brave Bird from Tapu Koko and takes very minimal damage. Whereas if the Ice Cubes did any other combination of moves or switched the targets to the Blastoise, they would be in a very good position. However, this is a really big and impactful switch in. We see the Steelix comes in, and the Tapu Koko is able to kill the Bronzong. However, the Bronzong is still able to be pretty healthy and does a pretty good amount of damage. The Bronzong then takes a Thunderbolt, and the Hydro Pump misses, which is huge. And the Bulldoze not only lowers the speed of both Pokemon, also activates the weakness policy on the Dragalge. And we see that the Steelix here ends up, Tapu Koko faints, and the Steelix goes for a Rock Slide, which is really bad play in hindsight, because if they would have gone for damage, either of them could have killed. In the following turn, we see that the Mr. Mime goes for a Dazzling Gleam instead of a Psych Shock, which is another really negative play that ends up preventing them from killing the Dragalge. And the Body Press in the Steelix goes in the Bronzong, ends up pretty much making it a very terrible situation. The Psy Shock on the Mr. Mime goes into the Dragalge, and the Gyro Block finishes it off. And now, because the Dragalge and the Bronzong both outspeed the Steelix and can both one-shot it, even though the Steelix gets the kill here, the game is over as long as the Dragalge hits its next move, which it does, getting the kill. This is definitely... was very much in favor of the Ice Cubes, but they made a couple of misplays that ended up getting the Porygons back into this game and getting the game 1 win. Next game, we see that the Ice Cubes lead the same lead, but in this situation, the Porygons end up bringing Bravery, which they are able to get a fake off in, which means that the only one attack can go into the Bravery, which has a Wakan Berry, which means it can take this attack very comfortably and is able to get a very free Brave Bird, or very clean Tailwind up from here. With that, they get a Brave Bird and outspeed the Lucario and the Tapu Koko, bringing the Lucario really low, and then the Scald is able to finish it off, and so they're able to kill the Lucario, which is very big. In addition, the Thunder Punch on the Blastoise just barely misses out on the KO, and the following turn, the Bravery is able to get pretty much a one-hit KO on the Tapu Koko, and the Blastoise goes for an Icy Wind, lowering Melodic speed, which is really relevant when Tailwind is over. However, Melodic, sadly, just ends up going for a Life Dew, which makes this turn really not that impactful on the Ice Cubes because they lose them on and pretty much do nothing except get Melodic Burn for its Marble Skull. The Bravery ends up not being able to target because of the Giga Impact, but the Scald goes into the Steelix, getting pretty good damage. However, the Life Dew this turn does heal the Steelix pretty comfortably, which is very impactful, because not only that, the Steelix also gets a Rock Slide, which gets the double KO, meaning that the Life Dew was very good this turn. However, this leads to a double switch in after this double knockout, which might end up being not in the great position. So we see that the Silvally is able to get a Swords Dance up, and the Melodic goes for an Ice Beam into the Silvally spot, which is grass, and so it does a little bit under 50%. However, the Body Press goes into the Protect of the Urshifu. The following turn, the Melodic goes for a Protect, which ends up not being the most impactful because Urshifu's ability lets it attack through and gets a clean Wicked Blow, which does pretty reasonable damage. However, the multi-attack also goes into the Melodic, which protects it, which is pretty helpful here. And the Heavy Slam goes into the Silvally, and it just misses up on the KO. Melodic ends up going for a double protect, and the Wicked Blow goes into it, just barely missing out on the KO. And the Silvally goes for a multi-attack into the Steelix, meaning that the Melodic's Protect ended up actually not being particularly useful. However, it is able to kill it just barely misses out on the kill with the Gyro Ball and the burn from the Melodic kills, and then the close combat is able to finish up the Steelix. This ends up being a pretty convincing Game 2 win, I would say, after the really close Game 1. And there we are for our match. The Parking Paragons are able to win 2-0 and get a pretty convincing win Game 2. However, I think Game 1 was really close, and the ISQs playing a little better probably could have gotten them this, and it would have been a really interesting match 3 if that would have been the case. Continuing on to our next match, we have the Alexandria Arcanines versus the Trixie Tricos. Let's get into the match. Here we are for the match. So the team here is the Arcanines. The team on the left is the Tricos. Some notable items on the Tricos team is that the Charizard is Choice Scarf. The Jolteon is Choice Specs. So with that, let's just get into the match. We see that Tricos lead the Sableye and the Jolteon, and that the Arcanines lead the Liepard Dragapult. The Dragapult switches out into the DD, playing around some sort of prankster shenanigans from the Sableye, and we see that the Liepard is Psychic Seed, and it increases its special defense. The Jolteon goes for a taunt into the Sableye, going for maybe a way to deal with the thing, and the Volt Switch goes into the Liepard, doing a very high chunk of damage, especially since Liepard's at +1 special defense. However, Tapu Fini is able to switch the terrain, and when coming in, it reveals its Misty Seed, increasing its special defense. However, Sableye has yet to do a move, which means it is not going for priority move. It goes for Knockoff, which gets a clean one hit into the switch end of the NDD Mail. The following turn, Tapu Koko protects, and Liepard goes for a Snarl. The Klotzer, which was moved in, is going to reveal that his Terrain Pulse in the Misty terrain is being up and is going to get a huge damage into the Sableye, getting pretty much a clean one-hit KO. From there, the following turn, we see that Jolteon comes back in, and Jolteon ends up getting Fake Tears, and the Klotzer, which we know is Choice Scarf from the team preview, ends up actually outspeeding the Jolteon, which only occurs if Jolteon's modest, which it is. In addition, the Tapu Fini, however, is able to get a Moonblast into the Liepard, getting a KO, and now it's down to 2v2. Here we see that the Charizard comes in, and we see that the Dragapult comes in. And like I said, the Charizard ends up revealing that its Choice Scarf outspeeds the Dragapult, getting a pretty good damage, but gets a huge flinch, and this flinch ends up being massive. The Klotzer, because its Choice Scarf is stuck into just using a Fairy move, which ends up being really not particularly impactful. And since the flinch, the Tapu Fini was able to clean up the Dragapult, and the Charizard is able to go in, get the flinch, and the Tapu Fini is able to finish it up. So that big flinch on the Dragapult ended up being pretty impactful, but overall it was a pretty close, tight back and forth. Let's get into game 2. The Tricos lead Jolteon Shiftry this time, and Dragapult focus on the Arcanine side. Shiftry gets a Sucker Punch into the Dragapult, just barely missing out on the KO, and the Dragapult's able to get a U-turn, does massive damage into the Shiftry. However, Shiftry is a Focus Sash. We see that then they're able to switch out Liepard. However, Jolteon gets a Volt Switch into it, ends up getting a one-hit KO over because it doesn't have the Misty Seed or Psychic Seed boost from game 1 that we saw, and we get the Misty Seed from Tapu Fini when it switches in, preventing the Spore on the Amoonguss, making this incredibly annoying, in addition to the Tapu Fini getting the special defense boost. So we see that the NDD, however, then comes out and removes the Misty terrain and activates the Psychic terrain. However, they switch out Tapu Fini into the Ninetales in order to get the Chlorophyll boost of Shiftry to outspeed the Tapu Fini, or the NDD, trying to gain the one-hit KO. However, NDD protects, which allows the attack to not go into the NDD, and the Fungus is able to clean up the Shiftry with a Sludge Bomb. The Tricos then, after this, are going to bring back out Jolteon, and we see that the Fungus goes for a Rage Powder, and the Volt Switch goes into the Fungus. The Fungus takes a little damage, not that big of a deal. However, it gets a clean switch into Tapu Fini, which sets up the Misty terrain, which lets the Expanding Force on NDD not do as much damage, and the Ninetales reveals its physical, gets a Flame Charge, kills the Fungus, increases its speed, and the following turn, the Flare Blitz is able to clean up the Dragapult because the Ninetales outspeeds because of the Flame Charge, and then the following turn, the Ninetales is able to clean off the NDD with another Flare Blitz, getting a pretty convincing Game 2 win after the really close Game 1. And that's the match. The Tricos are able to get the 2-0 win, which was a very convincing Game 2 win, I think, with some really interesting tech with the physical Ninetales. Next up, we have the match between the Cambridge Cameroots and the South Croydon Stars, and let's get into it. So the team in the front is that of the Cambridge Cameroots, and the team on the left is that of the Stars. Let's get into the match. Stars lead Meowstic, Archeops, and the Cameroots lead Chandelure, Fletchlander. However, the Cameroots switch out both of their Pokemon turn 1, and the Archeops go for a Meteor Beam and miss. However, the Psych Shock also goes into the Magneton shot, which breaks the sturdy on the Magneton. Meowstic next turn is able to get the light screen off, and the Earth Power goes into the Magnezone, killing it, showing that the Meteor Beam miss ended up not really mattering. However, the Magnezone ended up not doing much, and the Snarl lowers both of these Pokemon, which both were revealed to be special attackers. The following turn, the Fletchlander comes out, gets a Tailwind with priority, and we see that the Air Slash goes in the Drampa, flinching it, which is really big, and the Hippowdon switched in from the Meowstic spot. Following turn, the Fletchlander is able to get a flinch off into the Hippowdon, which is really big because it's a physical Mon and gets some chip. In addition, the Drampa is able to get a Snarl, which does a little bit of damage, but it goes into the Protector of the Archeops, so the special attack drop is not that infectable. And the Hippowdon is able to get a Body Press into super effective in Drampa, which does pretty good damage. Following turn, Drampa switches out, and the Fletchlander goes for a Taunt into the Meowstic, which was switched in for the Archeops, and the Stock Power goes into the Hippowdon, increasing its defense and special defense. The following turn, the Chandelure goes for the Heat Wave, which does very big damage, even though the Hippowdon has a +1 special defense, and the Fletchlander just goes for another Taunt into the Hippowdon, so both Pokemon are taunted. However, the Psyshock goes into that, and the High Horsepower misses, which is pretty big. The following turn, the Dracovish switches in to take a Heat Wave, which it takes pretty comfortably, and the Heat Wave does end up killing the Hippowdon, getting a KO, and the Fletchlander doesn't have much to do except for setting up Tailwind. And now both Pokemon are faster. The following turn, the Archeops comes in and protects, and the Will-O-Wisp goes into the Dracovish, missing, which is really big. However, the Rishish ends up missing out on the KO. The Will-O-Wisp goes in to protect the following turn of the Dracovish, and the Archeops is able to get an Air Slash, finishing off the Drampa, getting a pretty good position for them. The following turn, Chandelure comes in, goes for the Shadow Ball into the Dracovish, just barely misses out on the KO, and the Taunt goes into the Archeops. The big thing we see here is that the Fletchling actually doesn't have any damaging move, and if it had a damaging move, it might have been able to kill the Arctovish, which might have won them the game. However, the Fletchling the following turn dies to an Air Slash, going with a 2-0 win in favor of the Stars. So Game 2, Meowstic Archeops lead just like last time, and Gothorita Drampa, which was a mix-up this time. Turn 1, Meowstic goes for the Fake Out, flinching the Gothorita, and the Meteor Beam goes into the Gothorita, doing huge chunks of damage and increasing the special attack of the Archeops. However, Snarl does pretty good damage to both the Pokemon and lowers both of their special attacks. The following turn, Meowstic gets a light screen, and the Air Slash from the Archeops into the Gothorita is enough to kill it. And the Drampa just goes for another Snarl, which does very big damage through a crit in the Meowstic and lowers both their special attacks. The following turn, Archeops goes for an Air Slash, super effective into top, and the Psyshock also goes to Hitmontop, doing very big damage, making it very low on its HP. Hitmontop also gets the flinch from the Air Slash, which is huge. The following turn is double switch, and the Draco Meteor just goes in the Archeops, pretty much making the turn null. The following turn, Archeops Earth Powers into the Chandelure, doing very minimal damage after all the special attack drops, and the Heat Wave misses Hippowdon, which is huge because that would have done very big damage, and the Heat Wave just misses out on the kill on the Archeops, and the High Horsepower is able to kill the Chandelure. Here, the Jampole just goes for the Draco Meteor into the Hippowdon, and if the Heat Wave would have hit, this would probably have been enough to kill, but it's hard to say. The following turn, Hitmontop comes in, the Fake Out is able to kill the Archeops, and the Hippowdon just goes for a Slack Off, bringing it back up to basically max HP. The following turn, Dracovish comes in and is able to get a Vicious Run in the sand and kill the Hitmontop. The following turn, the Draco Meteor just misses from the Drampa into the Dracovish, and the Body Press is able to get a kill and getting the SARS the win. And with that, we see that the SARS ended up winning 2-0. One of the defining features, I believe, in this match was the SARS had a lot of pressure on the first 2 turns of both games, and that definitely made the camera-ups kind of be on the back foot for the entirety of the match, leading to the SARS victory. With that, we have the final match of the week, the Tyrannosaurus versus the Welsh Wailords. Let's just get straight into the match. So our team in front of us is that of the Welsh Wailords, and the team on the left is that of the Tyrannosaurus. So note of things on the sauces is that the Cresselia is choice spexed, the Naganadel is choice scarfed, and the Scizor is life orbed. I think those are some of the most notable things. And with that, let's get into the match. Crawdon and Cresselia is led by the SARS, and Roserade and Aurorus is led by the Wailords. The Wailords read a Protect on the Crawdon and Sleep Powder into the Cresselia, and Cresselia takes its first turn of sleep. Crawdon did in fact go for Protect, and the Hyper Voice does pretty good damage into the Cresselia and is blocked by the Protect in the Crawdon. The following turn, the Crawdon switches out, afraid of the Roserade, and the Roserade is able to get a Sleep Powder into the switch-in, which is the Torracat, and we see that Cresselia takes a sleep and Spiritomb is switched in safely. The following turn, Roserade switched out and into Aurorus, and both Crawdon, or Torracat and Cresselia sleep, and Snarl goes into both of them. Torracat takes another turn of sleep following this, and Scizor is switched in, and the Hyper Voice does pretty good damage into both of them, and a Lash Out goes into the switched in Scizor, which ends up doing pretty good damage. The following turn, Aurorus protects into the Bullet Punch that would have brought it down probably to its Focus Sash, and the Torracat takes its last turn of sleep, and we get a Shadow Ball, which just barely misses out on the KO of the Scizor. The following turn, the Scizor gets hit and killed by Shadow Sneak, which kills it. The Scizor probably should have gone for Bullet Punch there. However, the Torracat then ends up waking up doing a Fire Spin into the Spiritomb, but it doesn't do that much. And we see that the Ancient Power is able to kill the Torracat, making the Fire Spin pretty useless. The following turn, Cresselia wakes up, which is guaranteed, and the Moonblast goes into the Spiritomb, doing huge chunks of damage, and the knockoff on the Crawdon is able to finish it off. However, Aurorus from there is able to just get a Hyper Voice, which does pretty good damage into both of them, and is likely going to kill Cresselia the following turn. If that's the case, Instant comes in, fakes out the Cresselia, and the Hyper Voice goes into both, and the crit on Crawdon ends up winning that turn. However, the game was pretty much over even without that crit, and the Wailords able to win 3-0 that game with a pretty convincing win, even though, it was probably a little closer than it looked. Here we are for game 2, and it's Torracat and Naganadel from the SARS, and Roserade Aurorus again from the Wailords. We see the Fake Out goes into Aurorus, and we see that Naganadel, which is Scarfed, outspeeds the Scarf. Roserade doing Dragon Pulse does a little bit over 50%, and Roserade reveals Round, which would have been the double round, which would have increased his Aurorus speed. Roserade and Naganadel both switch out, and Spiritomb is the switch in, which takes an overheat, and the Aurorus ends up doing a Hyper Voice, which does reasonable damage to both. Aurorus is switched out into Incineroar, which intimidates both of these the Scizor, and Scizor U-turns out into Cresselia, which ends up switch out, makes the Cresselia take a super effective Shadow Ball, which does pretty reasonable damage. Instead, the following turn, fakes out, flinching the Cresselia. The Torracat goes for the parting shot into the Incineroar, lowering its attack and special attack, and gets a switch into the Scizor. And the Spiritomb gets a lash out into the Cresselia, which ends up doing pretty good damage, bringing it pretty low, roughly in the range of Shadow Sneak. The Shadow Sneak goes into the Cresselia spot, which was switched into the Torracat, and a Life Orb Superpower goes in the Incineroar, just barely missing out on the KO, and lowering the attack and defense of the Scizor, which puts it in a position where Flare Blitz is an easy KO for it. So the following turn, Nagano comes in, and the instant is switched out into Roserade, and the Spiritomb gets killed by the Dragon Pulse. With that, the following turn, the Incineroar comes in, fakes out the Nagano, and the Roserade is able to put it to sleep, putting it in a pretty good position, and the Torracat overheats into the Roserade, killing it. So now it's down to 2 versus 3. However, one of the Pokemon on the SARS side is asleep. The SARS are able to the Nagano goes to sleep, which is required, and the Torracat goes for a Fire Spin into the Incineroar. The Incineroar ends up Darkest Lariat into the Nagano, which ends up killing it. However, this ends up being a massive misplay because the Auroras goes for a Hyper Voice instead of an Ancient Power, which makes the Torracat not die, and we see Incineroar slowly getting chipped by the Fire Spin damage. The following turn, Cresselia comes in, hits an Energy Ball, which also lowers the special defense, making this overheat that also goes into a pretty good chance that might kill, and it just barely misses out on the KO. However, we see again the Wailords make a slight misplay where they go for the Darkest Lariat, was able to kill the Cresselia, but instead of going for Ancient Power, they go for Hyper Voice, which ends up not killing the KO on the Torracat, and we have to thread through this Fire Spin, which just barely misses out on the KO. If that Fire Spin would have hit the KO, the game would have been over. However, instead, the Torracat ends up getting killed by the Ancient Power and the Roars, and Matrix and the Welsh Wailords able to win. And with that, the Wailords win 2-0. That was another very exciting match in which the Game 1 was a pretty convincing win of the Wailords, and Game 2 was incredibly close, and the Wailords definitely made a couple of misplays that almost gave the Sauces Game 2, which would have made a very interesting Game 3. And with it, that is the end of our highlights for the VDL-V Create Round 1 of Playoffs. If anything you'd like to see in the future, please leave a comment or tell me on Discord. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed.